Chaplain Doug Carter was the chief of chaplains of the entire United States Army. That means he had 2,900 chaplains who worked for him, and he was responsible for the religious and the pastoral needs of over 1.7 million Americans. Major General Carver served over 38 years in the military. In 2003, he served as the senior military chaplain in the Combat Theater of Operations in Iraq. He has a master's degree from the United States Army War College. He studied war, and he studied its effect on our military and their families. He's also a pastor. He's pastored churches in Colorado, in Virginia, in Kentucky, and in North Carolina. He now lives in Waxhaw, North Carolina. We're very fortunate to have him in our state. Been married to his wife, Sunny, for over 49 years. I have 2 beautiful daughters, 5 grandchildren, and I also want you to know he played in a rock band in high school and in college. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Major General Chaplain Doug Carver.
Well, we'll pass by that rock band. I won't tell you the name of the band either, not today. I'm truly honored to be here. I'm humbled to have been invited to just say a few moments to you about a very special, I refer to them as a people group, the military community, our veterans and their families. One of the largest unreached people groups, in my opinion, in the United States, as far as really truly understanding their culture. So in my short time, I want to just say a few things about the military, because as Jim mentioned, 1%, actually less than 1% of everyone in the uniform. That means that maybe you may not know what the military culture is all about. But with that said, in this last war, at least the global war on terror, we deployed men and women from every county and parish, all 3,300 of them, to this conflict in Southwest Asia. So there's probably somebody near you that you may not know. In some cases, they may be sitting on the back row of your church or parish because they're still nursing their wounds, but they're great, great Americans. Peg and Meg and Jim, thanks for allowing me to be here. I want to speak to the lawmakers for just a few moments and the civic leaders who are gathered. And thank you for the support you've already provided to the members of the armed services. It's very evident. North Carolina has a reputation of being the most user-friendly state to veterans and their families in the United States. I think that's quite an honor. The 5th largest number of active duty troops. And again, I would say probably 700,000 or 800,000 veterans, maybe, according to statistics. And then if you add the family members to it, probably close to 2 million family members of the military community, active, Guard, Reserve, and veterans. The reason why I think this conversation is important is because in the 247 years of our nation, when we first stood up the Continental Army, we've only had 44 million Americans who have ever put on the nation's cloth. 44 million. And today, 22 million veterans, or those who are wearing the uniform, are alive today. So to me, it's almost I would say a kairos moment, a moment in time that I need to do something to ensure the best care for our veterans takes place. They deserve it. And I thank Governor Cooper, because I believe last month there was a proclamation that May was the Military Appreciation Month. So I again applaud North Carolina for doing that to ensure that our troops have health care, education, employment opportunities. And for those veterans here in the room, thank you for answering the call to our nation. You are freedom's sentinels. You do stand in the gap so that we can exercise the abundance of freedoms that we enjoy in America. I've been to a lot of countries, and although we're not perfect, we do have the freedom to speak, the freedom to assemble, the freedom to worship. It is truly amazing, a gift. And it was paid for by some soldier, sailor, airman, marine, space guardian, so that we can live in freedom. I want to also just thank the vets today, because this is the first time, if you think that in the past 20 years that we do not have combat troops in Afghanistan or Iraq. That is truly a blessing. This summer marks the 50th anniversary of the last combat-focused troops redeployed from Vietnam after a very long and painful war. Last of all, I want to just thank the military families, members who leave the home light, those lights burning so our troops can go and do the nation's business. May we never forget our family members and the children who all are part of this military family. I don't know a lot about this particular legislation. I'm really here to talk about the heart of our troops. But I do know that if you try to go to the VA, if you've been in the service, you can be seen, whether it's a combat wound or non-service related. But the ones who are left out, especially of non-service care, would be the spouses and their children. And it would be on the backs of our troops to either help them find some kind of medical care out of their pocket, and you know how that goes. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food and water and some other things are important before we even get into the health care. In March of 1865, in his second and last inaugural address, Abraham Lincoln said, "We must bind up the nation's wounds, and we must care for the one who was born our battles, and we must care for their widows and their orphans." That's on the VA's marquee in Washington, D.C., probably on most VA medical centers. And our government has done a great job and is doing a good job in health care, disability compensation, rehab, transition assistance, a lot of other benefits. But I want you to know that the needs of our veterans are many. War does that to you. The constant change in deployment does something to families as far as intimacy and relationships when you know that your loved one's going to go away every 6 months someplace in the world. We have troops today deployed in over 170 nations, and some in some hostile environments. We have troops that are still receiving hostile environment pay. 1 in 4 of our veterans are homeless. You look at homeless men or women here in Raleigh, and 1 of them, of the 4 you see, is a veteran. And the rising number of women veterans who are homeless is growing. We have a rise in mental health issues. 38% of our armed services suffer the invisible wounds of war, post-traumatic stress, the mild traumatic brain injury, which is very similar, by the way, to Sid's death. When one of these explosions goes off, it's basically every brain cell shakes for a moment in time, and then you never know. It's going to take years to see exactly what the effect of an improvised explosive device has done to one of our veterans. And of course, the suicides. 22 a day. We'll have 1 veteran kill themselves during this prayer moment. 1 every 65 minutes. So I've got a question very quickly. What can we do better? North Carolina is doing a great job, so is our government. But what can we do better? Because in my opinion, for our veterans, we can never do enough for them to repay them and to thank them for what they have done. You might say, well, why is that important after all, with all the other things going on? And so that gets me to my scripture that I first saw in the halls of Snow Hall at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, as a young field artillery officer back in 1973. I didn't even know they put scripture on government buildings at the time, but there it was. John 15, verse 13, "Greater love has no one than this, that a man would lay down his life for his friends." And I think of 3 words very quickly. when I think of that scripture and I think about our troops. I think about the noble cause in which they have served. I think about the cost for them putting on the uniform. And then serving in the military is a matter of the heart. I call it commitment, and I'll get to that very briefly. First of all, a noble cause. We should support our veterans because of the noble cause in which they've served. When they have put on this uniform, it changes so much in their lives. They lose their innocence. They lose their moms and dads. They lose their culture, their community. They go and see and do things that human beings should not see, especially in the carnage of war. And they do it for a noble cause. They really do it for the freedom of our land. They may say they're doing it for their buddy next to them in their bunker or foxhole, but they are doing it because our government wants to ensure that you and I have a secure and a safe environment in which to live. It's a noble cause in which they serve. Rhonda Cornum is a friend of mine, a retired brigadier general. When she was a major in Desert Shield, Desert Storm, as a flight surgeon, her chopper was shot down. She was sexually assaulted, several broken bones. She was asked by a BBC media later on, what were you thinking of when the helicopter went down? Now, that's kind of an interesting question. I'm going to die, whatever. But no, she said, I was thinking to myself, if I die today, I'm dying for a noble cause. I'm glad that I served. Rhonda Cornum, by the way, she recovered from that sexual trauma, which, by the way, again, a lot of our military members suffer from that. And she really led the pack for the armed services on resilience for our troops. To look for positive things that we can recover from instead of falling into bad habits after trauma. But you have to front load that in your life. A noble cause. The cost. 1 million lives have been spent in blood, sweat, and tears. 1 million killed in action since 1775. Almost 700,000 killed in action during the Civil War. Brother against brother. A tremendous cost. Hundreds of thousands of invisible wounds of war that we'll never see in an individual, but that perhaps they are struggling and carrying them. And if you get to know a veteran and they trust you, they may indeed share their sacred story with you. 88,000 missing in action or POWs since World War II. It's amazing the tremendous cost. I think about a young man I met at an airport in Memphis, Tennessee. I saw him standing with apparently his mother. He had a military cap on, and so I was going to go do the typical thank you for your service. And when he turned around, his face was horribly disfigured. And I thought he perhaps had been in an explosion in Iraq. And I told him, thank you for your service. And as I walked away, his mother came up to me and she said, please pray for my son. She said, since he's been in the service, he's had tremendous post-traumatic problems. And I said, well, was that from a bomb? And she says, no. She says, when he can't take it, he jumps into fires. Or he does other kind of self-destructive things because of the pain he is bearing in his soul. The cost. We can never do enough for our troops because of the cost they bear. And finally, just a brief word on commitment. Our troops are willing to lay down their lives for you and me. They're willing to ensure that you have freedoms and you'll never shake their hand or meet them. I think of Sergeant First Class Jared Monty, 10th Mountain Division in Fort Drum, New York. He was on a mission in northeastern Afghanistan back in 2007, and they came under attack by about 50 bad guys. And a couple of his troops went down, including the medic. And several of the troops wanted to go and try to recover the wounded soldiers in what we call no man's land, between the enemy and the friendlies. But Sergeant Monty said, no, these are my boys. I'll go after them. And 3 times he tried to retrieve his troops. And he was shot each time, finally mortally wounded. But here's what happened. As he lay dying, he said this to his soldiers of whom he loved. Tell my mama and daddy I love them. Tell them everything's okay with me and the Lord. And he began to recite the Lord's Prayer until he breathed his last breath. Greater love has no one than this, that a man or woman would lay down their life for their friends. And as I share these stories, and I could share here the rest of the day, but my time is up. But when we say, what can we do? Well, we can never do enough for our troops. But if it means passing some legislation so that we can ensure that those who are uninsured are taken care of, then it's worth our time and energy and the blood, sweat, and tears that you're going to spend in some legislative session. Because our troops, they deserve everything that we can give them, and then even more. Of all people, we must walk the second mile for those who have given their lives, themselves, their souls, their spirits, so that you and I can remain in the land of the free because of these brave men and women. Thank you.